When an army conquers a new country, there's one question that's more important than anything else. How are you going to pay the soldiers? So today, let's get into the surprisingly tricky and absolutely vital story of how the conquerors of the Iberian Peninsula actually got paid.
All right, let's really think about this. On the surface, it seems pretty simple, right? The victors get the spoils. But what happens when the spoils are an entire country? It gets messy, and it gets messy fast. Does every soldier just get to, stick a claim? Or does the government, the state, step in and say, whoa, hold on, this belongs to the entire empire? This was the huge puzzle they had to solve in early Al-Andalus.
I mean, think about it. The standard way the Umayyad Caliphate's armies got paid back in the Middle East was really straightforward. They got cash, a regular, reliable salary, all funded by state taxes. But in Al-Andalus, things went off script. The soldiers who did the conquering actually settled down on the land, taking it as their payment. And that created this massive exception to how the empire was supposed to work.
So, you'd think to figure this all out, we could just open up a history book, right? Well, here's our first big twist. The sources we have, the texts, they were written centuries after it all happened. And you know what? They completely contradict each other. They tell two totally different stories about who was really supposed to own the land.
And here's the real catch with these chronicles. They weren't objective history, not by a long shot. They were written way later by legal scholars and court historians, and they almost always had a political agenda. They were trying to legitimize the power structures of their own time. It's kind of like trying to understand an event from today by only reading opinion pieces written 200 years from now. Good luck with that.
Okay, so let's break down the first side of the argument, the soldier's perspective. This is a concept called ghanima, and it's basically the ancient tradition of battlefield booty. It's simple. Whatever you capture, gold, livestock, and, yep, the land itself, it gets divided up among the warriors who actually won it. It's direct, it's an immediate reward, and it is a fantastic motivator. The idea is simple. What I conquer is mine.
But on the other hand, the empire had a very different, much more, corporate idea. It's called fi, and under this Quranic concept, conquered land wasn't personal loot at all. Nope, it belonged to the entire Muslim community, and it was managed by the state. The whole point was to create a long-term tax base that could pay for armies and build the empire for generations to come.
And look, this wasn't just some vague idea. It was serious, high-level legal doctrine. While soldiers were literally fighting and bleeding on the ground in Iberia, you had these incredibly influential legal minds, like Malik ibn Anas, way over in Medina, laying down the law. He was arguing that this land had to be permanent state property. This was about building a sustainable empire, not just a quick payday for one army.
So the texts that we have left paint this really dramatic picture of a huge conflict. You've got later writers, especially the ones who were loyal to the state, and they're basically accusing the first conquerors of going rogue, of completely ignoring the official rules. They claim the commanders on the ground, Musa ibn Shayr and his army, just went ahead and carved up the peninsula for themselves as personal booty, as ghanima, and totally blew off the state's authority.
So the texts are just this tangled mess of accusations and political spin. Where do we even look for the truth? Well, we turn to the hard evidence. Let's set aside the biased books for a minute and see what the conquerors actually left behind, in things like metal and lead.
Okay, just look at the coins. On the left, you're seeing one of the very first ones. It's a transitional coin. It mimics North African money, but adds a Latin word for Spain. This is the kind of cash a conquering army makes, while it's still finding its footing. But then, on the right, just a decade later, bam, a fully Arabic dinar. That's not a conqueror's coin. That's the official currency of an established state government.
And this one coin right here is the perfect snapshot of that whole transition. It's bilingual. The front has Latin, kind of a nod to the old system. But the back has the Shahada, the Islamic profession of faith, in Arabic. This is the new state planting its flag and saying loud and clear, hey, we're here, we're in charge, and we're plugging this place into our system.
But wait, it gets even better than the coins. Archaeologists have found these little lead seals. You can think of them like official government tags, the kind you'd attach to a bag of taxes. And the words stamped on them are an absolute gold mine. They name specific governors, they make a distinction between land taken by force versus land taken through a surrender treaty, and here it is, the big one. They explicitly mention Fay Allah, or God's share, which is the state's cut. This is the smoking gun. It's hard proof that a state bureaucracy was on the ground trying to manage the spoils of war. Okay, so we've got two conflicting stories. We have the biased texts on one side and the hard archaeological proof on the other. So which one is right? Well, it turns out the truth isn't really in either one of them. It's in the clash between them. When you put it all together, the real story starts to emerge, and it's a story of improvisation, of compromise, and of making it up as you go.
So here's what really seems to have happened. It wasn't a neat, clean choice between one system or the other. The reality on the ground was, well, a messy, multi-step process. So, step 1. The soldiers arrive, and following age-old tradition, they settle on the land they seized as Ghanima. Step 2. The state administrators show up with their official coins and tax seals, trying to impose the official face system. And the result? Step 3. A negotiation, a compromise. The early conquerors got to keep their land, but the state made their ownership official in return for taxes and, maybe most importantly, their loyalty.
And this compromise created something totally new, a hybrid model of land ownership you couldn't find anywhere else in the Caliphate. It was this unique blend of the soldiers' raw right of conquest and the state's systematic need for control and cash flow. And this solution, which was totally improvised and born from a clash between theory and reality, it became the bedrock of Andalusi society.
Now, I know this might all sound like a dry administrative detail, but trust me, the consequences were enormous. This improvised payment plan literally laid the foundation for the next 700 years of history in the peninsula. You can actually trace how this messy compromise slowly became official policy.
You could actually watch this improvised fix harden into official policy over a few decades. It kicks off in 711 with that initial kind of chaotic land grab. Then, in the 740s, a new wave of Syrian troops comes in to put down a revolt, and they are formally granted lands as payment. This reinforces the whole idea. And the final stamp of approval? That comes in 756. The new Emir Abd ar-Rahman I, he needs powerful allies to build his new kingdom. And how does he get them? He secures the loyalty of the descendants of those first conquerors by officially recognizing their property rights. The ad hoc fix was now the law of the land.
And this is why all of this matters so much. This wasn't just about balancing the books. How you pay your army determines who owns the land. And who owns the land determines, well, everything. It shapes your aristocracy, your tax base, your entire political power structure. This early pragmatic compromise created a powerful, landed military class that would define the very character of Al-Andalus for its entire 700-year history.
All of this leaves us with a pretty fascinating question to chew on. We love to imagine that empires are built on these grand strategies and crystal-clear legal codes, all handed down from the top. But the story of Al-Andalus suggests that sometimes the most lasting things in history aren't planned at all. They're born from messy compromises, from on-the-ground improvisations, and from the simple, practical need to answer that one fundamental question: how do you pay for a conquest?